In this video, I want to give a brief taste of Wheelock, Chapter 2, Secundum Caput, second chapter. Caput means head. Anyway, so this section, this chapter, introduces the noun. Nouns in Latin, as in other languages like Greek, have case, number, and gender. Now, number and gender are probably more familiar to most of the people who would watch this than case is. So let's go ahead and knock them out quickly. So what is number? Number's easy as pie, especially cherry pie. But anyway, so a number can of a noun can be singular or plural. You can have one boy, or you can have two boys, or you can have 1,000 boys, but there's boy, singular, and boys, plural. So that's easy. Latin isn't like classical Greek that had a dual for two things, and Hebrew has a dual in some rare instances. Nope, Latin is easy on this score. You have singulars and you have plurals. You have one thing and you have more than one thing. Okay, so far so good. Now gender. Gender is not really that important. If you're running out of brain space, which you hopefully aren't because we're only in the second chapter, but if you were running out of brain space, gender is something not to waste a lot of time on. Really, the key to gender is that it helps you tell what goes together. So adjectives match the nouns they go with in case, number, and gender. Adjectives are describing words like a hairy bear or a scary bear. Hairy and scary are adjectives. Anyway, so gender can help you know what words go together. Sometimes adjectives can be separated from their nouns, like in the grocery store when you were a child and your mother went to the next aisle and you were busy looking at the toys. So you know that a noun and an adjective go together because they're going to match in gender. They're also going to match in number and case. But anyway, so gender can help in that regard. But really, gender is not a big deal, I don't think. It does affect the endings, but it's not a big deal. Now, gender in languages does not map exactly to sexuality. What do I mean? I mean, just because a word is masculine doesn't really mean it's male. Or just because a word is feminine doesn't really mean it's female. And just because a word is neuter, and these are the three genders in Latin, masculine, feminine, or neuter, just because a word is neuter doesn't necessarily mean that it has no sexuality. I had a colleague who used to say that nouns that can have sex will. But that's probably not a very edifying kind of thing to say. If something is obviously female, it's probably going to be feminine in Latin. If something is obviously male, then it's probably going to be masculine in Latin. But it doesn't exactly map up. I get a little annoyed, for example, when I hear people argue that Sophia in Greek or Kokma in Hebrew, that I get a little annoyed when people say, obviously they thought of wisdom as a goddess, or they thought of Kokma as God's female consort. And some people who say that seem to say that because the words are feminine. And, I may be missing something, but that's just ignorant. Just because a word is feminine does not in any way mean that the people who use that word thought of it sexually, any more than iglesia in Spanish. Oh, all churches are women. No, that's stupid. So basically, gender and sexuality don't map to each other in any kind of fixed or absolute or predictable kind of way. I've spent way more time on gender than I needed to because it really isn't that important. Case. Now, case is important. Case is very important. And you knew that it couldn't be that easy. I mean, number is simple, singular, plural. Gender, okay, fine. It's irrelevant, masculine, feminine, neuter. That's okay. Case is where Latin says, there's going to be some English people learning Latin, a couple thousand years from now. We need to give them something hard. Let's create case. And so they did. Case actually isn't that hard. It's just different. It's just foreign. It's something we don't really do very much in English. Now, let me do them in a common sense order. Let me introduce you to the cases. There are basically 6 cases here in Latin. I'm going to introduce them in a pedagogical way, then in a way that makes sense. When we get to the next slide, when we're looking at the chart of the endings and what the endings look like for these cases, then I'll put them in the order that they're usually in grammar books. But to start off with, let's ease ourselves into the idea of case. By the way, I don't know why they called it case, but they did. Maybe I could come up with something, but I'm not going to. Okay, so the first case, actually, before we get to the first case, let me remind you about the difference between English and Latin. English is a syntactical language. The order of the words Ken hits ball tells you what's going on. If I put ball hits Ken, it means something different because I've changed the word order. Inflected languages fly by the endings. They're in the clouds. They don't need to see the land. They can see from the instruments what the words are doing. So you could actually have Latin words in the order, ball hits Ken, and it can mean, in English, Ken hits ball, and the way you're going to tell is because of the things that are on the endings. It's like somebody has a sign on their back that says, I'm the subject. They have or maybe on their behind, because the sign is on the ending. Anyway, that's not important right now. Basically, you can tell that something's the subject because it's going to have what's called a nominative ending on it. It's going to have a sign on its behind that says, I'm the subject. So these are what cases are in Latin. Nouns have cases that tell you where they go. It's like a sorting pile, where the ones go in the subject, here in English, and the twos go in the object here in English. If I'm not making sense, stay with me. It will all come together. So we see, in verbs, we saw in the endings that inflection where is the subject an I, is the subject a you, is the subject a they or a we. The ending on the verb told you what the domain of the subject was. Well, the endings on nouns tell you how the noun, in the cast of characters of a sentence, what is this noun doing? The endings are the ones that tell you. By the way, there is a kind of standard order in Latin in which the verb kind of goes at the end and the subject does kind of come first. It doesn't have to be that way, especially the poets. They went crazy, you can imagine what a poet would do with the opportunity to put the words in a completely different order and to leave things out. And so, poets change the order in any language, I suspect. But so the endings on the nouns tell you what the words are doing in the sentences. So the first case I want to introduce you to is the naming case, the nominative case. It's the case that the subject goes. Now, there's always some smart aleck that asks, why did they call it the nominative case? Why didn't they just call it the subject case? Why do they have to make things so difficult? I'm not entirely sure why they had to make things so difficult, but the nominative case actually does do a little bit more than just the subject. So in English, when you put like if you have a subject, he is a farmer. Farmer in that sentence is not the subject. He is the subject. Farmer comes after a being verb, is. He is. A being verb, or if you remember from English grammar, a linking verb. A being verb is like an equal sign as far as case is concerned. So when I say he is a farmer, farmer is going to be in the nominative case. We call that, even in English, a predicate nominative, where the predicate is after the verb stuff, the verb and what comes after. Basically, the nominative case does actually do more than just the subject. We'll get to that in later chapters. I'm just explaining to you why they call it something other than the subject case, which would have made things a whole lot easier. But anyway, it is what it is. Ours is not to question why. Ours is just to memorize or die. So, the nominative case is the case of the subject. If a noun is in the nominative case, then our first guess should be that it is the subject of a sentence, the thing doing the verb, or the thing. Ken hits the ball, Ken is the subject. Ken is hit by the ball, Ken is the subject. In that case, he's being done by the verb, but that's not important right now, and pardon my light going off. This is the price we pay for saving the polar bears. Okay, so the accusative case then, it seemed to me, was the next logical case. To talk about. If a noun is in the accusative case, it is probably or at least my first guess should be, that it is the direct object of the verb. What is a direct object? A direct object is what is receiving the action of the verb. I had a great teacher in 9th grade, Mrs. Goss, who suggested that I ask the question, what, after the verb, and that will point me directly to the direct object. Ken hit what? Ken hit the ball. Ball is the direct object. And so if a word is going in the direct is going to be the direct object in a Latin sentence, it is going to be in the accusative case. Again, there are endings that go, there are letters at the end of the words that go with these cases that I'll show you on the next slide. The next one that seemed appropriate to mention is what's called the indirect object. The dative case, endings, that is, the special endings that say, I'm dative. These endings indicate, or at least your first guess should be, that a word in that case is a indirect object. What is an indirect object? Well, if Ken gave the book to me, Ken gave what? Ken gave book. That's the direct object. But he gave the book to me, and so I'm receiving the action indirectly. The book is receiving the action directly. Ken gave what? He gave book. But the book is passing on that action to me. Oftentimes, the dative case will put the word to in front of it. And there is no word to there in Latin. This is an important early shift to make in learning Latin, learning any language, is that sometimes it may take more than one English word to translate a single Latin word. And that is the case with a noun in the dative case, because the word to me, for example, to is going to pop out of the word. There's not going to be a word for to there in this instance. You're going to have to come up with it out of your, watch me pull a rabbit out of a hat. You're gonna have to pull it out of that dative ending, that word to in that case. By the way, in English, we do this thing in English. I can say, Ken gave me the book. Me is still not the direct object. Me is still the indirect object if I put it that way. I can put it two ways in English. Ken gave the book to me, and I can say, Ken gave me the book. The words are still all doing the same thing, even though I put it in a different way. And this is where Mrs. Goss's what really comes in handy. Ken gave me the book. Ken gave what? The answer to that question is still Ken gave a book. And Ken gave me, he's still giving the book to me. And so asking what helps identify what the direct object is, which in turn helps you clarify what the indirect object is in English. And in Latin, book is going to be accusative, and me is going to be dative, no matter what order the words are in. There is a standard order in Latin that we're going to be seeing in these chapters, but we're going to fly by the instruments. We need to identify what the ending is, and thereby identify what the noun is doing in the sentence. The vocative is not an important case as far as things go. This is, if you have extra time, learn the vocative. But it's so easy, I'm going to mention it. The vocative case is the case of address. If you're speaking to someone, tell me, O phone, who is calling me? Tell me, O Starbucks, how good is your caffeine? I'm addressing something. Tell me, Ken. Tell me, O muse of that great hero. This is the case of address, where you're addressing something. Tell me, O screen, what is on you? You're going to use the vocative case in Latin if you are addressing something or someone. Now we get to a couple of cases that are a little harder, I think, for us English speakers. The genitive case, I want you to start off, now it gets way more complicated than this, but I want you to start off by thinking of the genitive case as the case of the of. That, like Athena sprang fully, sprang fully armored from the head of Zeus, so an of pops out of a word in the genitive case. So agricolae means of a farmer. And, you might say, where did that of come from? There's no of there in Latin. Get over it. The of came out of the genitive ending I, agricolai. That I is where the of came from. So if a noun is in the genitive case, then your first port of call in translation should be to expect an of, to leap forth from the ending. Finally, the ablative case, and for you Greek aficionados out there, there is no ablative ending in Greek. This is where Latin, the Romans decide, hey, let's one-up the Greek and have an extra case. The ablative case, again, this is just to get you in the door. We'll perfect things later. But I'm going to call the ablative case the case of the preposition. I think it would be true to say that most ablative nouns that have ablatives on their behind, the sign on the behind that says I'm ablative. If the letters at the end of a Latin noun have an ablative ending on it, I'm going to guess that in most cases there's going to be a preposition in front of it. What is a preposition? A preposition is a relationship word. In the house, on the phone, behind the barn. Those are prepositions. They express relationships. They make them clear. And so the ablative case will often have a Latin preposition like ex, out of, the house, or into the house, or de, down from, by, so forth. Sometimes an ablative can appear by itself. So, for example, one use of the ablative is the ablative of means in Latin, where the word by, means of, or with, will pop out of the ablative ending, and there won't be a preposition there. The ablative is going to take a little getting used to. It is probably the hardest, but once you get it, it's not hard, I don't think. Especially if there's a preposition there, it's not hard, because the preposition says, here's what this ablative means. You don't have to think. I'll tell you what it means. So these are the cases. I've introduced them out of order in terms of the standard grammatical order, because I felt that this was a better way to get you in the mood for it. So how do they appear when they're in charts? Well, let me give you the endings of the so-called first declension. I don't know if you remember, but there's a previous video from yesterday, only one previous video so far, that gave you the basic verb information. And I said in that video that there were 4 verb conjugations, that there was this big pep rally where they got all the verbs together in Latin and they grouped them by, like divergent. They put them into, different houses. So you had the long A ones in the first conjugation, the long E ones in the second conjugation, you had the long I ones in the fourth conjugation, and then you had the wimpy short E ones, in abnegation there. In the third conjugation. Well, there was a convention the next day, I'm lying, in which they got all the nouns together, and they divided all the nouns into groups. And they got them into 5 different groups. And so today we're going to start with the first of these noun groups, the first declension. The first declension is mostly feminine, with a few transvestites. I hope you're not offended. It just seems to be a way to stick it in your mind. Basically, what do I mean by a transvestite noun? I mean a noun that looks feminine, but actually it's masculine. I realize that's not politically correct at all, so I apologize if I offended anybody, but basically this is a way to remember that there are some nouns in the first declension that look feminine, but they're actually masculine. So, I'm going to use girl. Again, remember that earlier slide that said if something has an obvious gender, then probably it's going to be that gender. So girl seems obviously, a feminine kind of word, and so the word puella in Latin is feminine. That a, and there are English words, English names. Maria, I just met a girl named Maria, feminine. That a is feminine. We have Cornelia. Is a feminine word. It has an A on it. Lucretia has an A on it. So there are names even in English, especially in Spanish, I would imagine, because Spanish also has A for its feminine. Iglesia is feminine. So again, hopefully that's helpful. Puella is the singular form. Puellae is the plural form of this word. And so puella translates as girl, as the subject of a sentence, and puellae translates as girls, as the subject of a sentence. So that's the nominative. N is for nominative. That's good enough for me. G is for genitive. So puellae translates as of a girl. By the way, Latin doesn't have really a word for a or the, and so you really have to make an educated guess as to whether we're talking about a girl or the girl. Latin just doesn't have articles, is what those are called, a and the. You can use the word for one, so you could say una puella, one girl, to say a girl, but really you don't need to know that, and just forget I said that. Let's just go with Latin doesn't have any articles. So puellae as a genitive is of a girl. Puellarum is of girls, plural. Okay, now some of you out there have already noticed a problem, and I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do about. If you invent a time machine, we can go back and shoot whoever came up with this. But a clever person might notice that the feminine plural, puellae, is the same as the genitive singular, puellae. How do I tell the difference? And just to make things worse, in the dative, it's also puellae in the singular. What's going on? Home Alone. I'm sorry. There's nothing I can do about it. Basically, you're going to have to use context to determine whether puellae is a nominative plural, or whether puellae is a genitive singular, or whether puellae is a dative singular. Basically, you have three choices. So if puellae is a nominative plural, you're going to know because the verb's going to have a plural ending. Remember laudant? If I want to say girls praise, I would say puellae laudant. And so then I know puellae is nominative plural because the verb is plural. Okay, I found that one out. Then for whether it's genitive or dative, you're going to have to feel, does this work better with an of in front of it, or does this work better with a to in front of it? So am I giving the book to a girl? In that case, puellae is going to be dative singular. Or is this the book of a girl? Then it's going to be puellae of a girl, genitive. Context is going to have to determine. Puellis is the dative plural. If I'm giving books to girls, then I'm going to use puellis. Puellam is the accusative. If I see a girl, then I'm going to have puellam, the accusative. If I see girls, then I'm going to have puellas. Notice how often the a of the feminine there shows up. It doesn't show up in the is, but it shows up everywhere else so far. Puella is the ablative. Now this is me. I don't know if anybody else does this in the world, but in my abbreviations, rather than write out ABL, I write an A with a line over it. Why? Because a long A is the sign of the ablative singular feminine. Notice that the nominative singular feminine is a short A. The ablative singular feminine is a long A. Wheelock will distinguish long A's from short A's. Unfortunately, once you get out into the real Latin world, it's kind of like Hebrew. If you learn Hebrew, when you're learning it, you often learn it with the vowel points underneath. But if you go to Jerusalem, there ain't no vowel points underneath. You have to learn how to kind of common sense the vowels. In the same way, in Latin, it's all nice in Wheelock. He gives you the long A's and the short A's and the long I's and the short I's. But once you get into real Latin literature, those macrons go out the window. So enjoy it while you have it. But puella with a long A is an ablative singular entity. And so if I wanted to say, I got something from the girl, I think that would be a puella. The preposition a, from, and then puella in the ablative. Okay, vocative. If I want to address a girl, oh girl, where are you going? Then I would use puella. Or girls, where are you going? Then I would use puella, I. Notice that the vocative is exactly the same as the nominative. That is always the case with first declension nouns. It will often be the case that the vocative has the same form as the nominative. How are you going to tell the difference? Context. Is this noun being used as the subject of the sentence, or is this noun addressing someone? And Wheelock's going to put, if he says, oh girl, where art thou? He's going to have a comma probably after puella. although there were no commas in original Latin. In fact, original Latin was all capital letters with no spaces in between. You know, if you go to Turkey or to Rome, actually not so much in Turkey, but you do find some Latin inscriptions in Turkey. But if you go to Rome and you find some Latin inscriptions, they're going to be all capital letters without any spaces between the words. Anyway, inscriptio continua. Okay, so there you have it, the endings of the first declension. So the first group of nouns are the A nouns. They are mostly feminine, overwhelmingly feminine, in fact, and they have these cases, these numbers, and like I said, the gender is mostly feminine. Okay, there's some miscellaneous things, and I'll be done. You'll be glad to know. This chapter also introduces you to adjectives. Adjectives are the words that tell you about nouns. So there was a song on Schoolhouse Rock, you know, it was a hairy bear, a very scary bear. You know, so bear is the noun, hairy and scary are the adjectives that tell you about the bear. So adjectives must match the nouns that they're telling you about in case, number, and gender. That's going to help you tell what goes with what. That's one thing to know. Adjectives also typically go after the noun that they modify. Spanish is the same way. French, I believe, is the same way, although the cobwebs in my mind are increasing as the years go by. So if I want to say a hairy bear in Latin, I'm going to say berus scarius, neither of which are the real words for those things. But anyway, so the adjective tends to go after. There are some exceptions. So the words this and that come before the word they go with. If I want to say this bear, it's going to be, you know, hic bear. This bear, it's going to come from. Numbers often come before. 1 bear, 2 bear, 3 bears, 4. The number is going to come before the noun they go with. So that's something, but generally what you should start off learning this week, or this lesson, is that adjectives usually go after the noun they modify, the noun they're describing. Okay, there are also pain nouns. Again, I'm not meaning to offend anybody. I'm just trying to help you remember that these words look feminine, but they are actually masculine, the pain words. So poeta, and I'm sorry that should be a long E. I didn't get back to it. I meant to, but I failed. So poeta it looks feminine with that A there, but it's actually masculine, and it means poet. By the way, this is the standard way for grammars and dictionaries to list a word like poeta. You might think, well, why do they list that other stuff? This is the genitive singular poetae that follows it. Why? Because sometimes there's some crazy stuff that happens in Latin. Sometimes the genitive doesn't look exactly like the nominative. And so if dictionaries, if vocabularies give you the nominative form and the genitive form, then you can recognize the word in any situation. So this is the nominative singular, this is the genitive singular. M stands for masculine here, giving you the gender. There are F's for feminines, and there'll be N's for neuters. So I hope that explains that. Agricola, farmer, agriculture. Agricola, agricolae, masculine, farmer. Incola, not an important word, doesn't even appear in the vocabulary of Wheelock. You don't need to know it, but it is one of those words that looks feminine, but it's actually masculine. And finally, nauta, sailor, is masculine, even though it looks feminine. So there you have it. Wheelock, Chapter 2, Basic Latin Nouns. And with that, we will say adieu until Chapter 3.